Welcome to me. This is very kind of you to come to this performance, part of Secrets and Layers, this exhibition by G20. And this one is really about the idea of the city as a stage. And there's quite a bit of talking in it, some video, there's some photographs. But I thought probably need a bit more action, so I thought I'd do some ironing as well. So yeah, that's what I'm going to do. And it's about the merchant city, and you're not here actually. You're that square up there. That's where we are at the moment. And over the last half of my life has been spent in working with artists and presenting work in the merchant city. And the ones I'm talking about are on these locations, as you can see, going from the High Street up at the top, across to Glasgow Green, down River Clyde to the pedestrian bridge, across to Buchanan Street, up to George Square. So that's the kind of area we're talking about. And also a bit about memory. And I've got this thing, I think we all do really, is that we're all at an event, you know, we come to events, we come and see things, but we see different things and we remember different things. So I've just got this idea of taking my memories and putting them on, sort of being able to wear them a little bit. So I'm just putting stuff here on that t-shirt. You're probably wondering why I'm dressed like this. It'll become apparent. I think it'll become apparent anyway. And if it doesn't, you can make really funny comments at the end. So what happened was, for me, shall I tell you, originally I was going to put all these images on all these clothes in the course of this. And I so admire, if you go on breakfast television on Saturday, and there's a guy who does the food programme, and he just talks all the time as he's speaking. He's sort of cooking a fantastic meal, and he never seems to stop, and he never gets it wrong. And I started putting these just to try it out. I thought I'd just try this and see how it works. And I thought, Christ, if I had to put all these images and all these clothes during this performance, it will drive you crazy. And I'm just demonstrating that now.
It's not so.
It's not hot enough. So, I'm so glad I did them in advance. Back in 1987, I got a phone call from somebody called Neil Wallace, who worked with Bob Palmer, who was the director of Glasgow 1990, which was the year when Glasgow was European Capital of Culture. And he invited me to come to Glasgow and work with a woman called Susan Deegan, who was the and to put together a festival to prepare one of the events that Bob was working on to prepare Glasgow to be European Capital of Culture. And so I came here, and the first thing I wanted to do was to find out what was going on, because I've been asked to put together things to happen in the street. And I wanted to know what was happening in the street, so I got here in 1987, and this is what I found. The godfather of sort of street theatre, Mike Lown, who was working with your partner, Mike? John Brown, and doing this reconstruction of the sand dance. And I saw this on Buchanan Street, and you were also the fabulous Big Worry, and Morag.
Gorgeous Morag.
So the question I had to you, Mike, was that when I got here, all I saw was you and a pile of musicians. Were there any other street theatre people here at that time?
Yes, there were. I mean, of the kind of modern busker style, there was a robot who did kind of in with a mask and things, and I've got a terrible story about him, I'm afraid. No, I'm afraid it's coming. So this guy he did this wonderful thing, and he used to make quite good money. Oh, there was Al Jolson too. I forgot about that. He'd have been totally barred now, wouldn't he? Anyway, yes, maybe I'll tell that story. So Al Jolson was this guy who blacked up and had 5 blue buckets, and he used to do, all that, And one time, John, who was the other guy there, gorgeous Morag, went into a pub, and there was Al Jolson sitting at the end of the bar, still blacked up and weeping into his pint. And John went up to him and said, intelligently, "You're Al Jolson, aren't you?" "Well, yes." He said, "What's wrong?" I mean 600 quid today. And he said, "What's wrong with that?" "I could have been doing it all my fucking life." Anyway. So, so that there was him, Al Jolson, there was the robot dancer, and then basically a lot of accordion, standard Scottish and wonderful buskers.
I'll stop you there, Mike.
Yes,
I know you have
absolutely.
another story, but we'll put that one a little bit later on. Because what I wanted to say next was that I was running a club in Brighton called the Zap Club. And it's an underground club. We put on experimental theatre, music and dance. And so we thought, right, what we'll do is we'll bring that up here. And we brought it to the Brigade. And we turned the Brigade into a nightclub. And we put on Joan Conn's fan club. That was Julian Clary. Being Hitler, who was Craig Ferguson. Jerry Salovich, I don't know if any of these names mean anything to you. And Colin McKenny Barr, who ran all the clubs, or some of the clubs in Glasgow, and they did the music, and Billy McInerney, who ran the Baby Grand, did the food and drink. And it was a great club. I mean, the Brigade was a great location for a club. But we then brought up from Brighton this organisation here. It's called Yes No People, and they did a gig on the Clyde, and literally on a floating raft on the Clyde called Beat the Clyde. And it, as it says, it fireworks raises, but it was the most incredible drumming. And that company then went on to establish Stomp, and Stomp is now a musical percussive theatre that's been going around the world. It's incredibly successful. So that's what we did to start with. But where I was coming from was that I had been really influenced by a group of anarchist, politically minded artists who had established themselves in the 50s and 60s in France, particularly, but across Europe. And they were called the International Situationists. And the International Situationists had a really strong critique of capitalism, of consumerism. Their writer, Guy Debord, wrote a book called Society of the Spectacle. And all their work was about getting people to re-engage with society, re-engage with their environment. And they established an idea called the Rive, which was like they'd take tours of Paris and they'd go down underground and then go up onto buildings, through people's houses, sometimes in a straight line, irrespective of what was in the way. And this was a beautiful kind of way of exploring the town. And they had this saying, "Sous les pavés la plage," underneath the pavement of the beach, which starts to explain why I'm dressed as I am. Yeah. And that has been on my mind and in my mind for all my life. And so, inspired by those sort of ideas, we thought, right, let's get some performance into Glasgow that kind of reflects what we're into. This is Iditopi. They arrived with looking like this, and they descended upon George Square, and the green person had a green towel, and the orange person had the orange towel, and the blue person had a blue towel, and they all came marching into George Square, laid their towels out, sunbathed, and completely blew the minds of the Glaswegian public. We then brought another company, and I've been looking for this piece of film for nearly 30 years. And Collective Organon are a group, or were a group, of French anarchists. And they said to us, can we we need 2,000 doors. So we went out onto the press and to radio and said to the public, if you've got a door you don't need, tell us and we'll come and collect it. And they then created on the high street, in the high street car park, now the home of Glasgow Life, they created a kind of stockade of all these doors. And inside it was this incredible thing going on. And the public arrived, and I can't remember how many, I think it's probably about 1,500. And they came and they arrived at the stockade and they started trying the doors, they couldn't get in. 2,000 doors and no way in. And they started walking round and round in the circle. And eventually one of the doors opened. And they went inside. And what they found was there was a bar, but it was really high and a slope. And all the drinks are free, but you had to scramble up.
It was a tequila bar.
They dressed a member of the public as a bird with beautiful big wings and hoisted them up into the sky and then had them wave their wings and then they dropped feathers all over them. There was a section of it where it was like going to a nightclub and there's a stairway to heaven and there's the person you find outside a nightclub deciding who can come in. And you go in with a friend and they'd say, you can go in, she can't, or vice versa. And then you go inside and you go into a labyrinth and you're very, very tight and you came out the end of the labyrinth and there's a cage and suddenly you had to do a trick for a lion tamer to get out. So this was happening. And then at a certain point, a fire broke out and it was over there. And these people looked at it and go, ooh, that's a bit nervous. And then move away. And then another fire would break out over there. And they go, oh, maybe it's part of the show. And then another one. And then another one. And then suddenly there's fires all the way along the staging. And then people moved back, and they moved back, and they moved back, and all the doors fell down. And then it turned into a beautiful fire sculpture. Now, I'm telling you the story. The great thing about the story was it tells you the sort of town Glasgow was, the sort of city Glasgow was, and it also told you about the relationship between us as artists, as creators, and the city people, and the police, and the fire brigade. And the reason we managed to do this is I took the head of the Strathclyde Fire Brigade over to Holland to see the show there and said to him, look, we need your support in doing it. And the show there, they had a fire brigade behind to make sure everything's okay. But at the critical moment when the fire started breaking out, their fire brigade came out and put it all out. And the head of Strathclyde Fire Brigade said, it's okay, Neil, we won't do that. We'll let it burn. We'll let it burn. So that's Collective Organum. 1994, I think it was. Yeah. And so we now move on to the coming. Luby, where are you? Luby, this is Luby. Now, Luby is Elvis. Luby was working with that beautiful throne that Luby was on. It's time for another shows go on my trousers. That thing that Luby was on was a throne made by the fabulous Ronnie Heaps. And this show, again, he was working with the communities across Glasgow. And the idea of the show was to bring those communities together and associate a different artist with each community. And I'm going to show you what it looked like. There we go. This is a vanity display. This is Mischief Lafar's, the first outing of the Elvises. But you can put a bit of sound on this. Because... Oh, there's no sound. Anyway. Luby, would you like to say anything about this? What was the experience like for you, being God? Oh, sorry, Elvis?
Yeah. The only thing I can really remember was the Elvises didn't like me very much because I was Elvis. And I remember, I think it was Katie who was in charge of that.
Katie Nichol, yeah.
Yeah. We couldn't get that. Ronnie had built a chair in a warehouse and we couldn't get outside of the warehouse in the morning, so Katie was absolutely crapping herself. Because I think that was maybe the first job for you. So she was like in trouble, but got out eventually. I can't really remember much about that show.
Yeah. Well, it was a beautiful show and it finished in spectacular style. Talking of spectacular style, and I'll see if this will... No, maybe not. Right. Okay, so the thing about New Zealand was we had been brought to Glasgow. This is, well, now we've got to 1994 and 5. And what happened is I'd gone back to Brighton and I got a call from Bob to say that there was an interest in creating a company that could close down the city and turn it into a venue and to work on a very large scale. And so I came back to Glasgow and I met with Pete Urban and Barry Wright of Regular Music, of Unique Events, sorry, and also Regular Music, and we set up Unique. So, and again, it's sort of really about the relationship between the artists, cultural organisations, and the city. Shine on Glasgow was, the idea of Shine on Glasgow was to encourage people to come to the city and buy stuff at Christmas. But it was incredibly well funded, so we were able to pull in money from lots of different sources and then create a winter festival, which looked a little bit like this. And this is Ocean All Over, and they are performing on a steel Christmas tree, which we commissioned, and it was on 5 levels, and it's sort of designed that you had to commission artists to make the most of it. So it was like a brilliant project because every year, we had it for 2 or 3 years, every year we commissioned more and more work. And again, this is Steve Edgar, actually, I can't remember all these people, and of course that's Mr. Flabat. Now, there's a little story about this. Whoops. When we were doing Shine on Glasgow, the company that was promoting it, they wanted to get Bobby Gillespie of Primal Scream to do the music to an ad. And I was very pleased to really when he said no. And I've been recently reading his biography, and it turns out that he is also a closet situationist. And also, he reveals in his biography that he got his first E at the Zap Club, which of course I don't know anything about. That's right. So there's a few surreptitious giggles over there. This one is proving very difficult. Right, never mind. Now, the centenary of the Scottish Trade Union. The Scottish Trade Union presenting to the Scottish Trade Union Congress, which at that time, most of the leaders of the Scottish Trade Union were men. And my accent, as you might have noticed, is quite English. And one of the most intimidating things that I've done was I had to present to the Scottish Trade Union Congress our plans as to how to celebrate their 100th anniversary. And I worked with Campbell Christie, who was the chair, and we presented all these ideas. We said we're going to have a parade, and we were going to have musical events in the Glasgow Green and George Square, and we were going to paint the Clyde red. And they absolutely loved that, and Campbell totally loved it, and the Daily Mail went absolutely furious, and they did a double-page spread when they did a fantastic representation of what the Clyde would look like if it was painted red. And they did the job for us, and it was a complete hoax. Of course, we didn't paint the Clyde red, but we did these amazing parades. And this one, drawing attention to this is Andy Scott, he who did the Kelpies, and he did this representation of Wellington. And just as an aside, when we went to go and see him in his studio as he was making it, he made it with wire work. And before it was dressed to look like this, it just looked incredible. And we said to him, God, it's a real shame that, we can't do it like this, but that's not what you've been commissioned to do. But he took a photograph of it anyway, and he sent it in when they were looking for sculptures to go on the M8, and he won the prize, and he got to put his sculpture on the M8. So anyway, this was the parade. But what actually happened was on the morning of the celebration at 5:30, I got up, getting ready, and took a phone call from a friend of mine who told us that Lady Diana had been killed in a tunnel in Paris on that morning. And then I phoned up Bob, who was in charge, and he was the boss of Glasgow Culture, and he's also the person who was coordinating the whole thing. And what happened, Bob?
Oh wow, that's a long time ago, but I remember making 4 phone calls, right? So I think I said to you, I'll call you back. So I called them, Campbell Christie, who is the General Secretary of STUC, explained the situation to him, and he said to me, what should we do? And I said, I think we should cancel. I then phoned the leader of the council, his name was Pat Lally at the time, called him, and same scenario, what should we do? What do you think we should do? I said, I think we should cancel. And the third phone call was to the chair of the Finance Committee of Glasgow City Council, whose question was, how much is this costing? And I said, I think it was that time around 300,000. He said, oh my God. What should we do? He asked me, and I said to him, I remember this, it's only money. He said, okay, cancel. And the fourth phone call was to the head chef at Glasgow City Council that was preparing a big banquet for STUC and councillors with 150 people. And this was the most complicated conversation I had because he'd already cooked, he told me, 800 haggis bonbons. And was just about to put all the chicken thighs into the oven. What should we do? So I said to him, don't worry, cook everything and hand out these remarkable treats to people in George Square. And that's exactly what they do. So I then called Neil back and said, we cancel.
And we did cancel, and there's a lot of fury. It went various ways, because some people were very, very angry, and understandably so, and some weren't. But we did it. About a month later, was it?
A month later. Right.
Yeah. So it did happen, which is where these
It cost another 250,000.
And no Pax bombs.
And then, and again, this is a story, this is the story of what Glasgow as a city has done. It became European capital of culture, UK City of Art and Architecture and Design in 1999. And for that, we commissioned Sticky. And Sticky was a gig by a company Improbable Theatre. And this took place in the Ingram Street car park. And an insect came out of the sky and animated what was going on. And what was going on was this entire structure, virtually the entire structure, was constructed out of sellotape. And it was just the most remarkable performance. And in a moment, you will see that. And the nest, or the creature that was down bottom, as appropriate, was transformed into this, magically, into this building. And Improbable Theatre, us having commissioned it, they then took the show all around the world. They went to North America and Australia and elsewhere. And it's very beautiful. So that was the year of architecture and design. And then, of course, there's it's quite a nice job to have, isn't it? And then we went into the Millennium, George Square, the Millennium. 120,000 people came into the centre of Glasgow for the Millennium celebrations. And there were stages, there's lots and lots of things happening. I could actually spend the next half hour just talking about that, but I won't. One of the things that did happen, though, was that Mr. Labar crashed a spacecraft into King Street car park. And the way it worked was that the day before, there's nothing to be seen. The next morning, people woke up, went to King Street car park, and this had appeared. It's not a great photograph, but it actually looked really convincing. And we told the BBC about it, and they got really worried. And they said, come on, you come down and see it. They said, no, people think it's like the War of the Worlds. They think it's real. I said, it doesn't matter. And they came down, and it was just standing in King Street car park, and smoke was coming out of it, and funny noises was coming out of it. And we said, I think there's creatures in there. And at a certain point, the door creaked open, and then these aliens came out with their guitars and started playing Telstar. And I'm putting this in, it's not quite a Merchant City, it's very close to Merchant City. I'm putting it in this. It's not. I put it in with Graham Gilmore, and Graham Gilmore was a very close friend, and he designed a lot of the projects that I was working with. And for this one, we got commissioned by the Scottish Canals, and they had this incredible engineering feat, one of many, but this was to reopen the Forth and Clyde Canal, and which many sections had roads driven through them, had bridges knocked down, and they got the whole thing back together again. And we needed to send a message that now the water was clean, fish could swim in it. So Graham created Millie the Fish, and we sailed it from Edinburgh to Glasgow. And every time it came to a new bit of canal, it chomped through a ribbon, turned into a fountain, sprayed people with clean water, and then the band appeared out and played nice Scottish music. Now, this is a bit of a story. Theatre of the Eighth Day, Teatr Odmigo Drie is a Polish company, probably the most important experimental theatre company in Europe. They've been going for many, many years. We had put them on, Brad put them on here in Falkirk, and we brought them to Glasgow in 2004, again to go to the famous High Street car park, which is no more. And the show was in two parts. The first part of the show was like a wedding party dancing, and the second part of the show was taking this incredible boat made of metal with pyrotechnics and metal everything, including the metal sails, through the crowd. So there's two things to be concerned about as far as health and safety is concerned. And the thing about the dance at the beginning, the wedding party, it was on a platform which is about that wide, that high, just over 60 centimetres high, and about from here to there. And I phoned up the people in Glasgow who were responsible for licensing and said, look, I think we need a Section 89, which is the kind of license you need if it's over 60 centimetres. But we can't give the details of it because the company is touring in Europe and we can't get the structural information. But we can guarantee it's safe because we've put them on and it's been licensed by two authorities, one in England, one in Scotland. And there's just no real response. And I said, look, if you could just come on the morning when they arrive, check it out, make sure it's okay, and then give us a license. And so on the morning, we were talking to the police and we've worked out a way of safely moving this dangerous thing through the crowds. And then the guy comes from the council with his certificate refusing permission. And it was the most embarrassing thing I could imagine because this was an incredible theatre company. They knew us, we presented them before. They could not believe that they weren't going to be allowed to do their show because their platform was too high. And so there's a lot of discussion about it. The police would number us, they just couldn't understand it. And in the end, we half destroyed that part of the set. We had to chop all the legs off, so it was just under 60 centimetres. And it was a very unpleasant experience. The show was incredible. The show was very, very good. But then it sort of signalled that things had changed in Glasgow. And whilst before we could take the guy who was in charge of the fire brigade over to see a show and demonstrate it wasn't dangerous, though it looked like it was. But now we couldn't even negotiate about the height of the platform. So we continued to make work, but we were very careful of what we put on. This show, it's about art and activism, I suppose. This show was by Christian Eisenberger, and it relates to the very famous photograph of Kim Fun, the young girl who was hit by napalm in the Vietnam War. And that photograph became one of the incredibly important visual representation that contributed probably to the end of the Vietnam War and certainly contributed to anti-war protests. And what Christian did was he took all the characters in that photograph and then made them as two-dimensional cutouts and put them in George Square. And it's just a really incredible piece of work. We worked with this company called Rock on Legion, and they were doing Derive. They were sort of travelling under and over the buildings around the Tron, and you sort of then understand that it's a kind of like it was like Derive was before parkour. It was probably the inspiration for parkour. The guy down here, he's playing the building. So one of them's climbing over them down the building, the other one's playing the building. This is a Buddha dancer. Kikiko, we was on the Merchant City Festival, and it happened to be the day there was an Old Firm match on. And the entire centre of the city and Merchant City was just full of very excited footballers. And she, on Brunswick Street, moved 3 metres in 30 minutes and totally enthralled the audience, who just stood there and watched as she just did this incredible, very, very slow movement. And it really confirmed to me that whole thing about art in public space, taking work out of the concert halls where educated people understand what they're going to see in a concert hall or in a gallery or in a theatre, but you take work out of there and just put it where normal, ordinary people will encounter it. And you don't have to do anything other than put on really high quality work and people will really get it. And this is a very good example of that. Ian Smith, the lovely Ian Smith, of Mischief the Bar. Mischief the Bar came to Glasgow when I came to Glasgow in 1988, and they created a whole style of performance in the street that kind of mixed surrealism with Glasgow humour. And they did the Petrified Forest, which was a load of Christmas trees being chased by a mad axeman. They did the Elvis Cleaning Company, when they came round and cleaned the car, whether you wanted to or not. They did endless shows. This was living in the cabin on the Street car park, and the artwork was being made around him by Shumit Sarkar. Angie, Ian's partner, and then worked with Bill Breckenridge to create this show, which is in Tontine Lane. Is that the right date? I think it probably is. I don't know.
Oh, it's certainly around then.
Yeah. And I think the whole thing about that was, I'm sure you're all familiar with Tontine Lane. It's quite a dodgy, if there's any dodgy streets in Glasgow, that's certainly one of them. And then you've got the it's mispronounced. Panopticon, thank you. You've got Panopticon. And this piece of work comes responding to the environment, responding to that street, responding to the Panopticon. It's just a very beautiful series of sketches and activity. And it's by Angie Dye for Bill Breckenridge, who designed it with her. And then we come to Kudlud. Kudlud is Slovenian pink people. Alan loves Kudlud, don't you, Alan?
I do, yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's a very good show. It was called The Invasion, right?
Yeah.
And the reason I love it is because so just where the guy on the left is standing is by a venue called Citation, which they went into, and their makeup was quite, it transferred quite easily to other objects and people. And they went into Citation and covered it largely in pink makeup. And we've been working Surge, I work for Surge, and we've been working in Merchant City, and since that day, they have been the most unhelpful venue in the Merchant City, without exception.
But public loved them.
It was very good.
Okay, so after this kind of thing about not being able to put on spectacular, large-scale stuff as we would wish to, we then brought Olivia Gross Tech back to Glasgow. And this is, again, just in Hutchinson Street, just one street along. And the way it worked was that this cardboard structure was in the brigade. We with lots of volunteers, made the bricks with tape and cardboard. And then they were transported into Hutchinson Street. And we started at the top, so you see the top 2 layers there, and so stuck them all together, and then the public lifted them up, put more bricks underneath them, and then stuck those together, and then lifted it up, and stuck more, and more, and more, and more, until it got to kind of that height, which I think, I don't know, it's about 30 odd feet, is very high, by which time it weighed more than 2 or 3 tons, and it took 100 people to lift it, to put the last bits underneath it. And if Olivia's feeling sort of playful, then they get them to move it around. And then finally it was pulled over, and then people danced all over it. As fantastically. I'm just throwing another one in, which is not quite Motion City. Frank Bolter, fantastic German artist. He basically got the public to build a paper boat for himself so that he could go back to Germany. Didn't quite work. And then we brought Olivier Grosseteste back for the Glasgow Green, and Jack Butler deconstructed his final piece of work. So that's kind of just about it, except to say Mike and Rach Ram were Rory and Ocky the dog, and they did their final performance last year at the Barrows, and I think they deserve a huge round of applause. Well, see, I said that it's going to be 26 minutes, and it's 5 minutes over. I'm very sorry about that. Would anyone like to make any comments? Anything like to say? Like to add?
Well done.
Well done.
You'll do some more ironing?
Yeah.
Yeah, I forgot there's one other thing to do.
It's what you prepared earlier.
Yes. Anybody want to reminisce or thought more? I'm going to stay here because I have to get changed, but thank you very much.
Thank you very much.